when I was watching Walter Nolen this fall, and I said, this is a guy that can win with speed. He can win with power. He can win with technique. He make plays late in the down and win with effort. The last defensive tackle that I saw in the draft that came out that had pretty good size with those athletic traits, and it's not my official comp. I didn't put it in the database, but the guy that I wrote down while I was watching him was Jalen Carter.
We're locked in, of course, with our guy Fran Duffy. Joins us from Mobile, side of the Reese's Senior Bowl. There it is, franchise mode with our guy Fran. Check out his work. Go PHNX.com, our all-city draft expert here. Become a diehard. You get that read for free, and it is as good, if not better, than anything else you'll see. Fran, what's the hot ticket? Not rumor, but who's a buzz right now at the Senior Bowl? One player that's got everybody talking just a couple days in.
Yeah, that's a good question, Johnny. I think that right now everybody's really kind of talking about who is going to be QB3, in this draft, and I feel like there's a couple of options down here at the Senior Bowl, guys that could vie for that spot. Obviously, the biggest name is Jalen Milroe, the quarterback from Alabama. Had some really high highs and had some really low lows. When you see that bowl game, what he did late in the season, not some of his best film, but. And you turn on that Georgia game, and that was the first game I studied from Milroe this year, and he looked outstanding. And you're saying, all right, this guy could be like in the mix for the number one pick in what's a murky draft. And obviously, it just was not always that way for Milroe this season. But then you look around, Jackson Dart from Ole Miss, he had another really productive season playing for Lane Kiffin. He is down here. And then the guy that, our diehards will know this, if you go through the database, Tyler Shuck from Louisville is a guy that I'm a big fan of. If you told me 4 or 5 years from now that he was like the Kirk Cousins of this draft, goes off the board in the middle rounds and becomes a starter, I think he's a really good pocket passer. The sample size isn't great with him just because of injury. This is a guy that had 3 or 4 seasons cut short due to injury. He's a 7th-year senior. I mean, he came into college. He was Justin Herbert's backup at Oregon. This is how long this guy's been at the college level. But all the injuries that he had, there was nothing like hugely structural. It was like, kind of a fluky injury here or there. So it's not like, those knees are going to go on him or that shoulder was a chronic problem for him. So I think when you look at Tyler Shuck, he's a name I would keep an eye on as a guy that could go, in these middle rounds, potentially even higher if somebody falls in love with him. But he's a guy who has an idea of how to play the position for sure.
Let's stick with Milroe a little bit, though. The measurables came out yesterday, the official Senior Bowl measurements, Fran. And Milroe, his hand size was a big topic, a conversation. Obviously, you're marrying the tape, the game film as you've got, and then also the measurables, and then the practice performances today. What did Milroe do in day one to kind of ease people who are concerned about, under 9-inch hands?
Yeah, and that's going to be a topic of conversation. We know it's that time of year, right? That's how you know that it's draft season is when the hand size starts coming into play. The way I look at it with hand size, with arm length for offensive linemen, any of these metrics that you point out, it's not a problem unless it's a problem. And I think when you look at Jalen Milroe, when I watch him, I don't see problems with like controlling the football, right? And that's where when you're talking about guys with small hands, typically it's like, all right, if they get into adverse conditions, or even if it's clean conditions out there, does he have problems gripping the football, driving it? When he does drive it, does the ball placement waver? To me, when I watch Milroe, that is not really like his issue. His issue has been more consistently playing through structure and being able to go through things, and deliver with accuracy and ball placement. I don't look at it as like does he have the ability to drive the football scenario? And so, no, to me, I don't think, Bo, that's going to be a huge deciding factor for me when I look at Milroe. But I do think that it's going to be a turnoff for some. But that's the way I always view those measurements. Is it's not really a problem unless it's a problem.
Mike Green, by all consensus, is a first round pick, certainly in a top 20. With the early returns this week, is there an opportunity for him to solidify himself, Fran, the Marshall edge rusher that had 17 sacks, that was a transfer and dominated the likes of Ohio State this year? Is there a potential for him to be a Khalil Mack top 10 pick? Mack, of course, out of Buffalo once upon a time. Like, I know it's early. Are you seeing the kind of jump that could vault him into that category, similar like Quinyon Mitchell a year ago, coming out of nowhere?
My guess is, Johnny, probably not. I think that when you look at Mike Green and the way that he's built, what the traits ultimately look like, we'll get a better sense of how he tests in a few weeks now, at the combine. But I think when you look at the way that he's built, he's kind of has like a little bit of a modest build. He's not. That's the thing with Khalil Mack is Khalil Mack was like he was a brick house, was all power, had the ability to just torque guys open and drive right through offensive tackles. When I look at Mike Green, that's not necessarily like his style of play. He does want to win with hand fighting and kind of clear the edge, and he'll win with those speed rushers. He does a nice job of winning late in the down with effort. Those are all really, really good things. But I think when you look at guys that are going to take that next jump to go that high in the draft, typically it's because of like high-end traits. Typically the guys that are more like the technicians and the high effort players, they typically don't go that high. And so that's why I think it would surprise me. Now, if he turns out that he ends up dominating this week and then he goes to the combine and he tests better than what I anticipate, because that does happen. There are some guys that are just really good testers and just, end up blowing the doors off that thing. If he goes and has that kind of workout after a strong Senior Bowl week, then there's not a lot of holes you can poke in the evaluation. In a murky class, that's where he can go a little bit higher than expected. But I think ultimately for teams that are like pure 4-3, maybe pure 3-4, and they just want that guy going forward, I think Mike Green is a really good fit off the edge.
I've developed a bit of a draft bromance for Deon Walker, Kentucky. I'm blown away by, the size, the athleticism. I read, obviously, what you've put together, your scouting report on him as far as his flaws. He's red flags all over the place, but I'm it's like my buddy's telling me you got to break up with her. You got to break up with her. There's all these red flags, but I keep going back. What can you tell me about Deon Walker? I saw him all over my timeline today. Showed off all that size, all that strength. Are you going to talk me in or talk me out of Deon Walker?
I guess, are we talking 20 or in the first round? Are we talking at 16?
Put a ring on it, Bo. Jeez.
Yeah. If we're talking second round, I think I'm on board there. I'm on board with taking a swing at that point. I think when you look at Deon Walker, number one, you saw the measurements. He's 6'7.5", north of 350 pounds. But I'll tell you, I saw this on film, but this is my first time being around basically all these players, up close and personal. And one of the things I'm doing, I try and get to practice early and during warm-ups, during stretch periods, during special teams periods. I'm just sitting here in the stands and just trying to body type guys. I get the binoculars out and I'm looking at how are these guys put together. And the player that kind of comes to mind as I'm watching Deon Walker, I was around Jordan Mailata for his first few years, the left tackle for the Philadelphia Eagles, and he's 380 plus pounds, and a guy that has abs, doesn't have fat on him. And, I don't know that Deon Walker is like that put together, but when I look at him, I don't look at a guy that looks like he's 370. He carries the weight extremely well. He's got really light feet. He moves well. There's a reason the guy that big, they would stand him up and line him up off tackle. They did some really unique things with him when he was at Kentucky. The big thing is that he just plays too high too often. And that showed up on film, but then also showed up here. They did a compete drill at the end. And that's one of my favorite parts of practice here in these all-star game settings is, all right, after practice is over, let's get everybody huddled up at midfield. And we're going to do one rep of wide receiver DB, one rep of running back versus linebacker, a tight end versus safety, and an offensive lineman versus defensive lineman. And it was Deon Walker got called out to go up against I believe it was the guard from Sacramento State. I'm like, all right, this should be now that guard. This is a guy that started at Georgia. He was a former big time recruit, right? So this isn't like some 0-star guy coming in. But at the end of the day, I'm like, all right, this is a really good matchup here. Deon Walker popped right up out of his stance and never got off the block. And so the offense wins, and the defense all had to do 25 push-ups. It was like, man, that's exactly what Deon Walker does on film consistently. So he's got some things that he needs to correct. But if he gets with a coach that can correct those things, you're really cooking with gas, because there's not a lot of guys that are that big with feet that light.
Let's talk about a prospect a little bit more refined, right? Most of us have a first-round grade on that. I looked, and it appeared like he was dominating all day. Walter Nolen, defensive lineman out of Ole Miss, and you go back to his game tape, Fran against Georgia, elite, Mississippi State, elite, South Carolina, elite. 6'3", about, what is he, like a little over 300 pounds, would be perfect for Jonathan Gannon's scheme up front next to like a Darius Robinson. You have a pro comp for Walter Nolen. First of all, do you like pro comps? And can you give us one? Because I watch him now, I'm like, is that Fletcher Cox? Can we get another Fletcher Cox here?
Yeah, I mean, so I do like comps. I think comps can be an important, as long as you kind of you use them correctly.
I'm irresponsible with comps. I'm throwing out like
be responsible. We when we talked last week, it was like talking about the Cam Scatterboot thing, right? And I think that when you're looking at comps, a lot of the ways that sometimes I'll look at it and it's pure height, weight, speed, like physical attributes. This guy is built exactly like this player. He moves just like this player. Sometimes it's like a usage thing. Sometimes it's, this is the kind of role I think this guy can play in the NFL. And then sometimes you get the perfect storm and it's like, oh, it's everything, right? But, when I was watching Walter Nolen this fall, and I said, this is a guy that can win with speed. He can win with power. He can win with technique. He make plays late in the down and win with effort. The last defensive tackle that I saw in the draft that came out that had pretty good size with those athletic traits. And it's not my official comp. I didn't put it in the database, but the guy that I wrote down while I was watching him was Jalen Carter, who the Eagles took in the top 10, and he's been a monster for them this year. And he had a really good rookie season. And I'm not saying that Walter Nolen is Jalen Carter, but I think that when you look at all the different ways that you can win, I think that he checks so many different boxes. Last week, I was at the Shrine Bowl out in Dallas, and I was talking with J.J. Pegues, another Ole Miss defensive tackle, and he said he was just raving about Walter Nolen and said that, this is a guy that came in and was just really smart. He transferred in from Texas A&M and spoke really highly of him. So that's I'll be putting those quotes into the database here in the coming days and weeks. But I think when you look at what Walter Nolen can do physically, there aren't a lot of guys in this class that have that talent. To me, he is a top 20 talent, physical talent in this draft.
Look nice in Nick Rollis and Jonathan Gannon's 5-man defensive line rotation. Okay, I'm a fan. We talked about Mike Green a little bit. We've talked some interior defensive linemen. As far as the edge, or maybe take us to the offensive side, what are we missing as far as day one in Mobile?
Yeah, I think that when you look at it, this receiver class, here in Mobile, like this receiver group, not as star-studded as what we've seen, in recent years. I think that there were some really nice catches down the field. I just watched a double move from Jalen Lane, the wide receiver from Virginia Tech. He sold him, made a great catch. Pat Bryant, the wide receiver from Illinois, he had a couple nice catches today. So we'll see if anybody kind of separates themselves from the pack as the week progresses. But when I look at this group, I don't see anybody, Bo, where I'm like, all right, this guy is a definite first round pick. Write it down in pen. I think that those guys will have to work their way, towards that. I think it's the same thing with the tight end group. If I had to pick one tight end, I would say Elijah Arroyo stood out to me. He had one drop in the middle of the field, but other than that, this guy has playmaking ability. He averaged over 16 yards per catch for the Hurricanes over his entire career. Really only 1 year of impact play, and that was this year, where he was essentially the top, the most dangerous target for quarterback Cam Ward in that offense. So as far as playmakers go, I would say that those would probably be the guys to keep an eye on. This is a pretty good running back group, and I'm interested to see if any of those guys separate from the pack as the week goes on as well.
Yeah. Nobody tell Monty Austinford about the tight ends. Like they're set there.
Trey McBride,
they're good.
Let's turn the clock back to last year. Obviously, Marvin Harrison Jr. didn't participate in the Senior Bowl, but Darius Robinson did. And I know a lot of people dogged on that defensive class last year. What did we have? About 15 straight offensive players taken last year in the first round. Where would some of the highlights of the Cardinals draft class last year fall into this group this year? Where would Marvin fall? Where would Darius fall? Maybe a guy like Max Melton. Like, clearly this is a meat and potatoes line of scrimmage draft. Just off the cuff, Fran, some of these guys for the Cardinals a year ago, where would they fall in the line with this class?
Yeah, I think, Marvin Harrison would be the first receiver. I feel pretty good about that. Even if you look at Travis Hunter as just a receiver, I still would take Marvin Harrison Jr., that prospect over Travis Hunter, just the receiver, from a apples to apples standpoint. I think when you're looking at Darius Robinson, I had some concerns about Robinson in terms of like, all right, well, what is he? Is he? I thought he was a little bit of a tweener, right? Where it's like, oh yeah, is he a big end? I don't know if he's going to be the quite that impact interior disruptor, on the inside. He grew on me as the evaluation went on. When I studied him in the fall, I didn't love him. He had a pretty good week down here in Mobile, and that made me go back and watch a little bit more. And I started to see what other people saw, but still didn't quite get to first round label there with Darius Robinson. With Max Melton, I did like Max Melton. I thought that he was probably like a cornerback 3, for somebody. I think you guys tell me, like, I feel like he probably outplayed that a little bit this year as a rookie. And it seems like the arrow's pointing up there. So I'm excited to see what he looks like in year 2. But, Tip Ryman, in this class, this is a pretty good tight end group. So I think that he probably would not go as high this year as he did a year ago. I think it's a little bit of a mixed bag. Obviously, the big one is, making sure that Marvin Harrison Jr., gets on track in the top 10 pick.
Yeah, no doubt about it. The decision for Cam Scatabo to not participate, is that something that is it a good decision? Are we going to see a unique kind of pre-draft from Cam, or you think he'll probably, like, how do you kind of forecast his pre-draft?
My guess is, and I haven't talked to anybody about it, but my guess is it was like, all right, look, you had a long season, man. You were beat up at the end. You gutted it out in that playoff game. Like, you don't have anything else left to prove. That would be my guess, is that an agent got in his ear, and said that. That would be my best guess as far as Scatabo. I would expect that he's going to go to the combine and go through the normal paces. I don't think it's going to be like what Harrison was last year, where he sat out everything. So my guess is we'll get like the official height weights, and we'll get all the measurements and all the test scores from Scatabo here in a few weeks out in Indianapolis. So to me, I looked at that as more, this was we don't need to push it. You had an outstanding season. This guy left everything on the field in that playoff game, in that loss to Dallas, or to the Texas Longhorns. So I think when you look at that, that's probably what led to that decision.
Why are people on my timeline talking about Dillon Gabriel, Fran, about how hard he can throw a football? Like, what? Like, come on now. What are we doing here? He's 5'10". He's a really nice college player. I appreciate he's out there competing. Like, are we talking ourselves into Dillon Gabriel because this class is so vanilla? What are we thinking?
Yeah, in talking with people here this week, I think most in the NFL are looking at this as a late day 3 pick. I think that's kind of where we're at. There's probably a little bit of myth making there and some wish casting, hoping that he can be a little bit more. But and look, I agree with you, John. I think it's like a great college player, especially what he did this year for the Ducks. I mean, he was awesome for them, especially throughout the course of an undefeated regular season. But I think when you look at his pro prospects, he's probably more of like a high-end backup at best, as opposed to someone that's going to be starting material. And at the end of the day, I mean, we've seen it. Last year, it was you had a bunch of those quarterbacks go in the first round, and then we didn't see Spencer Rattler go off the board until what was it, round 6 to the New Orleans Saints. So, and Rattler was a much better prospect than what we're talking about with Gabriel. And so I would be surprised at this point if he went earlier than that. And that was the 5th, 6th round of the Saints.
Streets are telling us he threw the ball 74 miles per hour. That's got to be incorrect, right? I mean, Joe Milton he topped out at like 64 last year.
I mean, there was a lot of play action involved, so he might have been a crow hop, on the run, really leaning into that. That would
Somebody
be my
driving by in a car was going 74, and they caught that rating up. I mean, what
he pulled the Michael Scott? Yeah, I go 25 miles an hour. I got it. I still got to go through the zebra scores there and check out those GPS numbers.
We don't need those. We were just kidding. I don't need any I don't need any Dillon Gabriel stats on this show. I do want to quickly follow up on Jalen Milroe, though, because I think that a lot of us, myself included, you try to talk yourself into the characteristics. He's coming out and saying all the right things. He wants to be like Lamar Jackson, and then a lot of people, coincidentally, because he's in the Super Bowl, are talking about this can be Jalen Hurts. And I do feel like, the measurements are almost identical, sans the hand size, which we covered already. The production was not there. Could I make an argument, Fran, that this is a kid that got stuck in a transition after Nick Saban left, and they just never got their act together at Alabama? You pointed out the Georgia game, and you need a sample size of 2 seasons. Hurts did it. He was fantastic with Lincoln Riley, en route to a Heisman Trophy. But for that singular game against Georgia with up-teen draft prospects on the defensive side, he dominated. 3 total touchdowns. He ran. He threw the football well. Can Jalen Milroe, what's like the ceiling for him to get drafted this year?
I mean, the ceiling is the first round. I do think that there's. I mean, we saw Anthony Richardson go in the top 5, and that was off of 1 year as a starter where he was up and down. Obviously, traits for days, right? And I think when you look at Jalen Milroe, look, there was a tweet from Jim Nagy. This is I want to say going back to the summer. And he was telling a story in the tweet about, I went to the pro day for Jahmyr Gibbs, and Jahmyr Gibbs ran 4.36 at the combine. He's like, oh, he's got to be the fastest guy, on this team. And someone said to him, there was another scout said like, oh no, like there's one other guy that's faster than Jahmyr Gibbs, and they said it's the freshman quarterback Jalen Milroe. Again, Gibbs ran 4.36. So that's the kind of speed that we're talking about, when you're talking about Milroe. And that's what's different with him and Hurts. People will make the comparison, but Jalen Hurts is like a downhill power runner. He's got a little bit of juice. He'll show that every once in a while, but this is like the lightning quick, like Jaden Daniels, Lamar Jackson, like take off, and it could be 40 yards in a blink kind of speed, I think, with Milroe. And now what I would say is that, when you compare him to, like, let's say Anthony Richardson, right, where it's that small sample size, I do think the highs with Milroe in terms of what he's done, arguably it might be even a little bit better. Like the sample size is certainly more.
Yeah.
I personally would have liked to see him go back for another year. I don't think I've talked about it with you guys. I'm a pretty big proponent now in today's landscape with NIL. These guys are getting paid so much money where, go back, take that extra time. I mentioned Spencer Rattler earlier, and and I would point to Spencer Rattler, who, he did have extra eligibility. If he wanted to go back, I'm pretty sure he had another year. He ended up making like less than $1 million base salary this past year, holding a clipboard for the Saints. Cam Ward was projected to go into the draft and go in the same area as Rattler. He ended up going to Miami, goes to the transfer portal. He makes at least $2 or $3 million this past year, and there were reports that it could have been higher than that. So he made more money than Rattler, got another year of starting experience, improved his draft stock. Now he's going in and like maximize your earning potential long term. Put yourself in best position for long term success. And so when I look at Jalen Milroe, and that's why like Carson Beck from Georgia made a great decision, go back. Drew Aller from Penn State, make a great decision, go back. Like even if you don't go back to your school, go to the portal and see, and see what you got. If you want to go somewhere with a different staff, with a different supporting cast. And so when I look at Milroe, I do wish he probably took that, made that call. Obviously that ship has sailed. And so now teams are going to have to decide, when am I willing to bet on these traits? And a lot of people are starting to link up he and the Cleveland Browns, their new offensive coordinator, Tommy Rees. He was Milroe's offensive coordinator his first year as a starter at Alabama back in 2023. Is that a marriage that could happen in the second round? Would they have to trade up to make that call? I think the next couple months will dictate that. But Milroe is supremely talented. It's a matter of just reining that in and giving him patience.
Yeah, that's some interesting insight there. You have a great write-up as far as your time at the Shrine Bowl. You've got your all Shrine Bowl team right now up at gophnx.com. A couple standouts from U of A, ASU as well. I saw Tim ask about Kobe Bryant, who I think is a fascinating prospect who was high last year at this time, went back to school, and looks like he's a late day 3 guy right now, but out of Kansas. We'll probably have to table that for tomorrow, though, Fran. You got to get to Dreamland and get some barbecue tonight.
Yeah, I don't know if I did some meatballs today for lunch. I don't know if Dreamland is in the cards for tonight, just so because of the lunch I've got. But it'll be a small bite tonight. And then I got Felix's on the deck for tomorrow, so we'll be doing seafood tomorrow, right around this time, maybe like 25 hours from now.
His write-up is live right now. He recaps the East-West Shrine Bowl, previewing the Senior Bowl. Check out his draft analysis, unparalleled. Second to none, it's our guy, Fran. Franchise mode here with Fran Duffy here on PHNX Cardinals. Fran, we'll chat with you tomorrow, my guy.
Sounds good, guys. We'll talk then.